sheet stuff.
Hi, everybody. Steve Albrecht from Library 2.0 at library20.com in the Safe Library. My colleague Kate Hall here from Northbrook, Illinois. Her book, The Public Library Director's HR Toolkit, a 2022 ALA publication, a cool book for people that are either need some knowledge about HR or have a fair amount and maybe are taking over an HR function in the library. So Kate, welcome. Thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks so much, Steve. I'm so excited to be here and to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is, of course, human resources.
So tell us about where you are now. You're in Northbrook, Illinois. You're
I
executive
am.
director of the
I
library
am
there.
at, yes, indeed. It's so Northbrook Public Library. We are a one building serving a community of 35,000 on the north side of Chicago. And I have about 115 staff and a very healthy budget. So we are fortunate enough that I have an HR manager, but this is something that I feel very passionately about and have worked at. Every other library I've worked at has not had an actual HR person. And when I became a director, I learned that, oh, wow, I have to learn all of this and I do not want to go to jail. So I better learn quick,
So
which
that was kind
I
of,
haven't
that was
been to jail. So I'm succeeding.
so far so good. So that was the impetus for the book, just your own knowledge kind of put forth to people that need to know what they need to know.
Yeah, I was amazed as a new director now over a dozen years ago that there weren't resources in a field dominated by books to help with figuring this stuff out. So that is what I and my co-author Kathy Parker did with our first book of like, how do you actually run a library? And then the most questions we got was the HR piece, and it was something that we both really love. And that led us to creating the second book, the HR Toolkit. Because there are a lot of laws that you have to navigate, and there are just a lot of things that we tend to promote people into management positions and be like, okay, now manage, and not give them any tools. So we wanted to create an easy to use toolkit that people could actually take and use hands-on right away that would help them be better, which in turn is going to be only more beneficial for their employees, right? Because I was a clueless manager, and let me tell you, I feel still so bad thinking back about my poor employees under me.
So I think one of the values of your book is there's so many samples,
Oh,
templates. The appendix is really well thought out. There's a lot of stuff that makes it one of those books that you got to pull down and use and dive into, as opposed to something that's kind of written like a policy manual that people say, well, I'll pull it out when I need it. But yours is really kind of driven by the tools that you need to be successful. Yes?
yes. Well, there are, I mean, as we know, there's over 9,000 public libraries in the country. And when people think about public libraries, I think they often think about large metropolitan library systems or, like my library with 115 staff. We've discovered there are libraries of so many different sizes. We have libraries here in Illinois that have budgets of $15,000. That covers materials, books, programs, salaries. So it is, we needed to give people something that would help them be successful. It shouldn't only be accessible to libraries with money. We wanted to make it something that people could just take and immediately use. And to be honest, I love a good resource. One of my favorite, I have a whole folder of all sorts of additional resources I've created, and I love sharing those because one of the things that's greatest about this field is we share resources with each other. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We have plenty on our plates. Let's use what's already existing.
And tell me the first book you did with Kathy Parker. What was that
It
one?
was the Public Library Director's Toolkit,
Okay, so this
which
is
went,
sort of derivative then, like the next
I
generation.
consider it to be like 2.0. No,
Okay.
it took our chapter on personnel, and it expanded it and did the employee life cycle. So when Kathy and I would talk about our first book and do trainings, there were always a million questions around HR, like how do you do a benchmarking? How do you deal with this? And we just couldn't get into that level of detail in the first book, right? We gave really broad overarching, like here are policies you should have. This allowed us to dive deep on all of those subjects and give people tools, not just library directors, but new managers, frankly, because I've been managing since I was 19. I know, what were they thinking? And I never received any formal training.
So that's like 5 long years now for you, right?
I wish. If you add a 20 onto that, then you would be a little bit closer. Yeah.
So, one of the parallels I think about what you just said is coaching skills. So you
Yep.
say you're expected as a new supervisor, even a pick, supervisor, manager picked, below the director level to have coaching skills and see, okay, where do you get those? You get them on the job and you get them through countless conversations with employees about performance or behavior. So I kind of see the same thing with your book, which is what is the process for people that don't have an HR background to get up to speed pretty quickly? And you say, well, how come you don't know that stuff? And the answer is because I didn't specialize that in my educational background.
Right. And there's such a flood of information on every topic out in the world now that you can't, you can, it's impossible. But what we as people working in libraries know how to do is access information, find good resources. And, um, one of the things that teaching new managers that I think is the hardest thing for them to understand is they're shifting from doing to coaching, right? Their job is no longer do the collection development, do the programming. Their job is now making sure that the people under them are doing those things. And I think that it is highly presumptuous of us to say, oh, well, this is so great because we've just promoted this person who was really excellent at this set of skills into a position that requires completely different skills. And we're just expecting them to run with it.
And a part of a human behavior, which is difficult, which is having crucial, challenging conversations with people that don't always want to hear what you have to say. And that's what
Yeah.
HR, I think, is really, really the buffer sometimes. People, a lot of managers and supervisors say, I don't want to have the conversation with my employee, you fix them, HR. And so HR professionals really have to have coaching skills and de-escalation
100%.
skills and communication skills. And you've dealt with people in tears in your office and you've dealt with people that are angry.
Yes. You mean
I
my tears or their tears? I
well,
mean, it's been both.
yeah, I do a lot of that myself. I always say it's a good coaching session if I get everybody to cry. Uh, when I look at the performance evaluation piece, I think
Yeah.
sometimes people put that back onto HR and say, well, I don't know how to write this, and so you fix it. Put in some words and phrases that make sense. And I think HR's function for not only coaching but for performance evaluation is, look, here are some templates, here's a script, here's a process, here's a sanitized version of a performance evaluation that you need to use that captures the way we want to measure things in our
Yeah.
organization and stop dumping stuff back onto HR and say, well, you fix this employee.
Well, and because so many places don't have HR, dumping the director also, and this is something that I did not do a good job of as a new director when I first started, getting everyone on the same page. So when we're talking about performance evaluations, when we're saying, wow, this person is exceeding expectations, are we all using the same kind of measurement? How are we measuring that? And we need to be really thoughtful and have those conversations so that we're consistent across the library. Because when we think about how do we create equitable and inclusive organizations, you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to make sure that you're thinking about things. And I've had managers that everybody exceeds expectations in every area. And when I ask, well, how are they exceeding expectations in, say, being on time? Well, they're here early, but you need them here at their start. Like they're just either meeting, and meeting is a great goal. And so I think that there's also this thing that everyone always has to be exceeding, but we need to do a better job of talking about how, and not just with the manager, with director, manager, with HR, but across the management team so that we're learning from each other.
What you're talking about for the eval, the performance
Yeah.
evaluation process, I think sometimes one of HR's strongest functions, especially new HR people coming in, or somebody who has, taken on the HR function in the library, is to say,
Hmm.
we need to sit down and redo the evaluation form. We have 17 categories, we have a 5-point scale, and there's 3.6s and
Yeah.
4.8, all that kind of stuff. I came from the city of San Diego and we had standard, which means you're doing exactly what we want you to do. Thank
Which,
you.
if 100% of my staff were standard, I would be
Then we
over the
have,
moon.
yeah, above standard, which means you barely get your feet wet when you walk on the water. You do things that are well documented to move the process forward and do your job beyond what we expect. And then below standard, which is performance evaluation, language
Which
for performance improvement
shouldn't be a
plan.
surprise
Sure.
to anyone.
So I see, 5, 6 categories that, exceptional, outstanding. No one knows what that stuff means. The other thing I'm interested in your
Yes,
feedback is I think that new managers and new supervisors need to understand the difference between a PIP and a BIP. A PIP is a performance improvement plan, which is follow
yes,
policies and procedures, do your work in this level of technical skill, whatever. But the BIP is behavior improvement, which is don't be sarcastic to patrons. Don't be rude on the telephone. Don't be an idea killer during meetings. And I think sometimes supervisors, especially new ones, don't know how to couch behavior-based language.
correct.
When you throw down your pen and sigh, when someone asks you a question, that body
How
language
about rolling
comes
your
across,
eyes?
yeah,
Oh,
and it comes across as condescending. So that's a behavior issue. Because what I see, and I'm sure you see this too, well, this person does their job well, but they have a horrible attitude.
right.
And first of all,
Nobody
I say
wants to work with them.
let's define what horrible attitude means, not a
Right.
not a label, but a behavior. So kind of talk to me of the difference between the PIP and the BIP.
Yeah. And I like your terminology. I've not ever used BIP as a terminology, but I think that you've hit the nail on the head. Most of the difficult conversations we have to have, it's easy to have a conversation. I noticed that you are not turning in your copy on time for the story times to be included in the newsletter. I noticed that you're not planning blah, blah, blah. I noticed you're not, the concrete things are easy to address. But how do we address the things that are more amorphous or maybe even a perception? And I think that this is becoming even more complicated. We recognize where people are coming from after the pandemic. There's a lot of challenges happening in libraries. I mean, literal book challenges happening. We have a ton of First Amendment audits here in Illinois. We have people that are coming in and that are just angry. And so we also want to recognize that the work we're asking of staff is harder, but we also have we want to create a place where people can feel safe, both patrons and staff. And so that is where, for me, I love a good policy, but I love having our library's core values to fall back on. And that is where I find in coaching newer managers that we say, okay, how is their behavior aligning or not aligning with our core values? Because it gives them something concrete when you're talking about something vague. And this is going like a couple steps back in the employee life cycle. How do we ensure that we're hiring people that do adhere to our core values, right? I don't think that we should be talking about people that fit in the library because that just breeds like, let's just hire everyone that's like us, which is very dangerous and not healthy for the organization. But we need to be thinking about how we can phrase it, because that's something that I know I struggle with of like, okay, they have a right to state what they are feeling, and everyone else has a right to feel safe in this space. So how can we have the two happen together? And that like I was having a conversation with a manager last week, and they were like, oh, I appreciate that you said that, because I know I've had, we've had our challenges in the past, and I appreciate that you saying that it is okay for me to lose my temper. And I said, oh, I think that you misunderstood what I was saying.
Close, but not exactly.
Yes. What I was saying is, I want everyone to feel that they can express when they disagree with the decision I have made. And I expect everyone here to focus on the impact that decisions have and not on attacking the person. And so what I'm hearing you say is that this means that you can behave in whatever way you want. And what I'm saying is, no, but I want you to feel that I want you to be able to express when you have things with the understanding that we are in a workplace situation. And I look at it through the lens of, I want people to be able to take in what I am saying. When we shout at someone, their brain literally shuts down. They literally cannot hear. So if your goal is that you want people to hear you talking in a way that shuts down their brain seems counterproductive. And so I try to tie it back into the science. And I do think that this is one that I have struggled with a little bit because I think I don't want to be tone policing people. And I want to make sure that people are behaving in a way that is respectful. And that then, when I apply our library's core values, I can say, okay, this is where that misaligns. So having those things to attach it to, for me at least, really helps when I'm like, am I just taking this wrong, or is this a problem?
And
And
it's
how is it
it's
impacting others?
yeah, it's driven by examples, which are it's hard for the employee to sort of wiggle out of examples. And when you say you have a lousy attitude, that's a generalizing, a label that's generalizing. It's hard to pinpoint that. But when you say you do these specific things in front of patrons, I always use the phrase, and it sounds like that's where you're going to, is this stuff hurts the business. It's bad for our business of being in the library. And I always talk about the concept of the business impact. So when you're late, it's a business
Yes,
impact issue. When you're rude,
yes,
it's a business impact issue.
yes.
And I think those kinds of specifics is what managers and supervisors need instead of saying you need to get here
And
on time.
documenting it.
Sure. And
Document all the good and the bad.
get here on time for the employee means, 8:20, whereas for you it's 8 o'clock. So get here on time means you need to be at your desk ready to go, doors open at 8 or whatever.
Right. And that
So
relies on the manager being clear in their expectations.
sure.
I also like how you're saying like the business impact. I tend to relate it of you being late to the desk impacts your coworkers because that means that they then can't take their lunch. They can't go plan their program. They can't. And so it's your behavior has a direct impact on others in the organization.
Sure.
And if our mission is XY serving the public, this is impacting our ability to do that, which I think is exactly what you were saying with the business impact.
So let's talk about the elephant in the parlor, which is, I see the same parallels in the library world, which I didn't come from. I came from city government and security and HR, but I look at the same parallels that library people face, which is so many expectations about having a MLS degree or MLIS degree or advanced degree in library information.
Yeah.
Master's, just like a social worker has to have a degree in social work. So you have to have an LCSW or a master's
Yes.
in social work. And you say, wow, library, social work, a lot of time spent in school, expensive degree, not always expensive salary to match. So is
Correct.
that sort of the struggle that you see in recruiting and bringing people in that especially we have an expectation for an advanced degree, but the salaries are not commensurate?
Yeah, so this is where I put on I am Kate Hall, the individual person, not a representative of the Northbrook Public Library.
Sure.
Um, I have an MLS. I also have an MBA. I am incredibly lucky that I was able to do both of those things and that school works for me. I've always been a great student and that I had the ability to pay for my education, mostly through student loans. So that is a whole lot of privilege that I got to have that allowed me to be sitting in the seat that I am in now. Not every person in our country has that privilege. And so when we talk about how do we make things more accessible, I think personally that what happened was we became a female dominated field. And people were like, oh, look at the cute little librarians. And we're like, no, we should be respected. I know what we can do to get respect. We can require an advanced degree. Now, I am very proud of my MLS. I think I learned a lot. Not that I tend to use a ton of it in my day-to-day stuff now, but I think it is an incredibly valuable thing to have. And I think that we have defined our worth as completely tied to having a master's degree in library and information sciences, instead of saying, no, we have value whether or not we have a degree. We just did a benchmarking study here at Northbrook, and we updated all of our job descriptions. One of the biggest shifts that we did was in changing the educational requirement wording. So for a librarian, it says, we seek someone with the knowledge, skill, and development of someone who has a post-secondary education that can do these concrete skills. So we talk about critical thinking, we talk about project management, we talk about collaboration, and we as a management team defined what it meant for each thing. And it was fascinating to me because when we were talking, and I said, okay, what are the skills that you have after having an MLS? What are the things that we're looking for? Our answers were all different. Everyone was looking at it completely differently. So when we were assessing things, all we're saying is, oh, you have to have the paper. We weren't actually assessing candidates on skills. And I'm
Do
like,
you
well,
think
gosh,
sometimes
let's,
that's a factor of a city or a county HR department, which is not connected to the library and doesn't and provides the HR function for the library, says, well, these are the requirements, is the way it's always been, instead of saying,
correct,
in this environment, we should know what we expect from people who want to work here as either managers, supervisors, or even rank and file
correct. And we
employees.
should be able to assess the candidate pool to see if they meet those. And it also clearly articulate. And so we say, which you may have gotten through getting an MLS, but we wanted to open up our availability to say, we recognize you can also gain these skills in other ways. So we're going to assess whether you have the skills and then say, did you get those traditionally with an MLS or did you get them through other experiences working in libraries for, 15 years or whatever it is?
So kind of related to that, and you can wear whatever Kate hat you want for this one, is kind of the low pay issue with libraries in general,
Yeah.
which is how do we recruit and retain people that don't leave for an extra 25 cents an hour somewhere else? Because that, it's the same argument I always see in the security world, which is we have a really good security guard. He or she's really, good customer service and pays attention, vigilant, and then
Yeah.
somebody else awesome offers them $1 an hour more and they leave.
Yeah.
So the staffing issues, and then that kind of gets into the Gen Z conversation, which is how do we bring people in that are fresh from school and looking at careers in government and public service and in libraries in particular. But the pay is sometimes we're hamstrung there. What is your sense of the trend there continuing?
Yes. Unfortunately, with our benchmarking that we just did, on average, staff received a 14% pay increase because my board made the choice and the commitment to say we need to increase salaries. We realized we were operating in a bit of a bubble. When you do benchmarking, you're looking at the market and saying, what is this paying? But if every single library is looking at the market and saying, what are other libraries paying? All you're doing is keeping everyone's salaries where they are. And when you go and advocate for your library with your city officials, your county, your state, your federal legislators, and say libraries need more money, and they're like, you guys are fine. We have allowed ourselves, this is probably not going to be a popular thing to say, we have allowed ourselves to stay there because we have not, I would say, advocated in the way that is going to get us the dollars. And I say that knowing that there are a ton of advocacy efforts at state levels, at county levels, at city levels, at federal levels. And to me, our number one resource as a library is our staff. And when I do advocacy, I most often am not hearing about staff. I most often, they want us talking about book challenges. And those are super, intellectual freedom is super important as well. But if we don't have the staff that can support that, then where does our democracy go? So we need to do a better job advocating for ourselves on the value of libraries. And this has been a challenge in libraries for forever because people are terrified of the word advocacy and don't understand what it means and don't know that really at its core, all it is building relationships.
So what do you think are some of the clever ways that you've seen for recruiting and bringing people
Yeah.
in? What are some things that you've done or you've seen that are pretty clever in terms of widening the applicant pool?
Oh, this is where I get to call myself clever. I like it. So one of the things that I think it's really important is they're interviewing you just as much as you're interviewing them. So it's a sales pitch. Your job ad needs to be a sales pitch, not just a boring recitation of all of the job descriptions. A job description is a formal document that's really important for a lot of legal and, you know, um, you know, training reasons. But the job ad, it needs to be a sales pitch. And if you're like, I'm a horrible writer, Chat GPT. I know that people have varying opinions,
Or get
but
somebody who's
ask
not
it.
a horrible writer and have them do it for you.
Correct. And remember to talk about the cool things about your library. So we have a whole paragraph at the bottom of every job ad that's like, and let me tell you about all the cool stuff about working here. Because you're selling yourself. You're thinking, oh, I gotta sell. Your salary might only be whatever, $14 an hour. But did you know that we give everyone their birthday off? And we have a staff picnic, every summer. Like, you need to sell it. And that's some
Scotch
of
in the
the
break
things that we've
room,
done.
beer kegs at 55
Well,
feet,
maybe. I mean, I would love
hammocks.
some nice scotch in the break room, but
So
probably would frown on that.
what you're talking about is not just putting it out there and saying, well, here it is, and come and get it, but you say, look,
Yeah,
we want to use the process to see if you're a good fit for us and we're a good fit for you. I have
right?
a process which I've used especially in panel interviews, which stuns people, which is I say, okay, assume you got the job. Tell people what you do here. And sometimes the applicant can't say, well, I think I do something with books. I mean, they can't say. And then the second question is, assume you got the job, tell people what we do here. What
Yeah,
what is our function? And they go,
yeah,
oh, you're this big building that people come and go all the time. So I find that interesting that sometimes people don't prepare themselves for the job or prepare themselves for
correct,
the question about what the job is about,
correct.
the building
And
it sits in.
I start every interview by saying, hey, I know that you read the job ad and you've probably done some research. I just want to describe some of the key things that we are looking for. Like, I don't want to hide. We send people the interview questions ahead of time. Um, I want them to come prepared. I don't want it to be like a pop quiz. I want them to know what they're walking into because if they're like, oh, I'm not interested. Why should we waste either of our time?
So are you seeing things that you're using the Indeed and Monster.com stuff, but also supplementing it with referral based things that are coming from existing employees? And what kind of stuff are you all doing?
So we don't do any kind of like referral bonuses. There's a couple libraries in the area that are doing that. They were experiencing some shortfalls with or some um, personnel shortages right after COVID. I didn't see it having a lot of success. And I think that just like with hiring, like one of the questions I like to ask people is, when does onboarding begin? People are like, well, on their first day. They're like, no, no, wait, no, when they get the offer letter. And I'm like, it actually begins in the job ad.
Sure.
That is the first experience they're having of what is your culture. And so when you are talking about how can you recruit people, I think that it's a little bit, I think that we're treating it a little bit like we're triaging, like, let's put a band-aid on this. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. I didn't actually clean the wound first and make sure that I applied some Neosporin. Instead, we're treating the surface level. You need to make sure you have a strong core organization underneath that because we don't want to spend all our time hiring. So I find that, yes, we need to spend time thinking through unique places to go. But have you spent enough time focusing on the institutional culture and making sure that you're creating a place that people want to stay at? Um, and often you can get people that want to stay, even if you can't pay them the same as they would be getting, you know, at, I can't think of the name of the place now, somewhere else,
Starbucks.
Amazon, Starbucks, there we go.
So I'm guessing if you put your HR hat back on, that you're a fan of probation periods like I am. I think it's a get to know you process. I think it helps them figure out whether it's the right place for them and vice versa. You like probation periods?
So in Illinois, there officially is one. So we do not actually call it out because I feel like one of the things when I'm talking about discipline um, or corrective action, if you will, uh, the first question I always ask myself is, have I been clear in my expectations? And have I given the employee the tools and training they need to be successful. And if I can't answer yes to those, then I failed in my job as a manager. And so I think having a probationary period for some people works very well. For others, if like we have a lot of neurodiverse staff, that creates a tremendous amount of anxiety and kind of designs a system that will lead them to fail. And so I don't think there is a one size fits all solution across the board. I agree that we should not hold on to someone when we've made a hiring decision that isn't a good match, not only because it impacts the organization, but because, let's be honest, anyone that's not being successful in their role, they're probably pretty miserable.
Sure.
So I don't want to say we're doing them a favor by letting them go, but also let's be realistic and make sure that we've done the work we need to set clear expectations. So I'm going to say a little bit of, I think where you're coming from with the probation is, yes, this is
depends. Yeah, it depends.
Holding people accountable. So yeah, as with most things, it depends. And I want to set everyone up to be as successful as possible. So that means adapting what you need to do, which is hard because you want to try and be consistent in HR, but you also need to be flexible.
Yeah,
so you have to be both rigid and flexible.
I think the idea that it seems to be kind of the middle ground is, say, do we have check-in periods that are formalized with the employee? There's a 3-month, maybe a 6-month. I think one year probation is too long.
But God, yeah.
But 3 months and 6 months ago, is a good fit. Are you getting what you need from us? And what are there technical gaps that we've not helped you with, training gaps, things like that? And so
that should be happening throughout the employee's tenure.
Sure, and that's the coaching piece that we were talking about, how valuable it is for not 100%. Just HR to be the fixer, but for the supervisors to be the coach.
When I was a manager, I never had regular meetings with the director.
So that's a flaw. Yeah,
it was. But I meet with every single one of my managers at least once a month, one-on-one, in addition to our monthly managers meetings, and it is so critical, right?
Well, and expected too, because you say my boss never talks to me is a miserable kind of way to think about things, and I don't see him or her except once in the hallway is a miserable way to see your job.
Correct, and to normalize giving feedback in those. Like my favorite thing is start, stop, continue. So each time you come in and you say, what's something that you would like to see me start doing to better support you? What's something that you've noticed that you'd like to see me stop doing, or something that you'd like me to continue doing? And then we do it for each other. So I'm getting feedback, which as a director is often hard to get, and I'm giving it, and it doesn't become a, oh God, am I in trouble? Am I in trouble? Sure. No, this is just how we're learning and growing.
Well, as we wrap up, tell me what you're working on, either training or writing wise, or what Kathy's working on. Are you doing some collaborative stuff together?
Yeah, so we do a lot of training on HR, and one of our most recent series that we've been working on and have done at a couple places is giving and receiving feedback. It is really hard because everyone typically has a negative connotation of feedback, but feedback is a gift, and it's a gift from our patrons. It's a gift from our staff. It's a gift that we give to people. And libraries tend to be pretty conflict averse, and so they also don't do a great job giving good positive feedback. Like, wow, that presentation was amazing. You connected so well with the audience, and your slide deck just was so crisp and clear. I loved it.
As one of my bosses used to say, you didn't screw up nearly as much as you usually do.
See? Beneficial, right? So that's something that we've been really enjoying talking with people about.
So are you doing training through ALA, or?
We do it through ALA, and then you can also do training with us directly. We have info on our website, librarydirectorstoolkit.com.
Okay. Is that the best way for them to get a hold of you?
That is the best way. Okay. Yeah. We have a form there in our email, which is info@librarydirectors.com, which I think Kathy teases me. One of my favorite things that I work into every presentation is we in libraries are institutions of lifelong learning. And so we ourselves should all be lifelong learners. And that is one of my biggest joys, is that I try to learn something new every day. And sometimes it comes from a book, sometimes it comes from staff, sometimes it comes from, people that I'm talking with. And in order to be strong leaders, we need to be learners. And so that is something that we both feel really passionate about. We're also working on updating our first book that came out in 2019, which doesn't feel that long ago, but the world has changed pretty dramatically. And so that is something I probably shouldn't even go into too much detail because our editor hasn't said like, yes, this is great, but that's
So
something
it's
that we
a
feel we
teaser, a
need to hit
teaser book coming down the line.
refresh.
So
Yeah,
next edition.
yes.
So I've been talking with Kate Hall. This is the Public Library Director's HR Toolkit 2022 ALA edition. She is the executive director of the Northbrook, Illinois Library, and you can get her at, again, give me the website again for
It is librarydirectorstoolkit.com.
Great. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks so much, Steve. It's been a blast.